What's going on, guys? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at this awesome gaming smartphone from a company called Snail. This is known as the MOQI i7s. And as you can see, it definitely resembles the PlayStation Vita, but we have a lot of differences here. This is a powerhouse for emulation and native Android gaming. And that's exactly what I'm going to be covering in this video. Native Android gaming, emulation, and I want to run some benchmarks on this phone. As for price, these don't come in cheap. $350 to $420 in the United States. Now that's what I've seen on several sites around the web. But you're not just paying for a handheld gaming device. This also dubs as a real smartphone. And in the United States, it's compatible with AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint. I'll leave all the carriers for different countries in the description in case you're interested in looking into getting one of these. But I do have to say that this thing is very big for a smartphone. I personally use an iPhone XR, and this dwarfs my iPhone. And all that extra bulkiness comes from the built-in joysticks, D-pad, and buttons. This is a true gaming phone in my opinion. Before we get into performance testing, I do want to go over the specs and features because there's a lot to cover here. Aside from the obvious built-in gaming controller, on the bottom of this unit we do get USB Type-C, and this supports Qualcomm Quick Charge. They've also included a 3.5mm audio jack for your headphones. Taking a look at the other side reveals our power button, our volume rocker, L1, and R1. Unfortunately, this is it. You only have L1 and R1 on this unit. I really wish they would have added an L2 and an R2, but this is it. Now those buttons can be set up on screen with different emulators or games, but we have a built-in controller and I really wish they would have added them from the start. The back cover is rubberized, so it's got a really good grip to it, but you will notice some fingerprints here and there. It's not as bad as if this thing was glossy, but they are noticeable after playing for a little while. The battery is user replaceable, which is a big plus on a newer device like this. Most new smartphones coming out nowadays do not have user replaceable batteries, so I'm glad to see it here. This is a 6,000 mAh lithium ion battery, and they claim 6.5 hours of intensive 3D gameplay straight through. Dual nano SIM card slots, and like I mentioned, in the US this is compatible with AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint, 3G and 4G. The i7s has 64 gigabytes of internal storage out of the box, but luckily we can add a micro SD card up to 256 gigabytes. Here's a quick rundown of the specs. For the CPU, we have a Snapdragon 710 8-core CPU, 6 cores at 1.7, 2 cores at 2.2. And if you do any research online about this phone, you might notice that the manufacturer states that the CPU is liquid cooled. And by liquid cooled, they don't mean that there's a reservoir in here filled with coolant and tubes going all over the CPU. It's actually just a copper heat pipe, and inside of there, there's a copper wick. They do drop a little tiny bit of coolant inside of there, so as it expands, theoretically it should keep that heatsink cooler. Pretty much all new higher end smartphones are using this technology right now, and it does do a great job keeping this CPU cool for extended periods of time. For the GPU, we have the Arderno 615 at 650 MHz, and yes, this does support Vulkan. 6 GB of LPDDR4 RAM at 1866, a 6-inch IPS 1080p display, dual stereo speakers. These are 1-watt speakers and they sound amazing. This thing gets really loud and it's got some bass to it. 64 gigabytes of internal storage plus a micro SD card slot, good up to 256 gigabytes. 6,000 mAh battery. They claim 6.5 hours of intensive 3D gameplay. Let's say you were just using the N64 emulator from the Google Play Store. You could get up to 9 hours with that. As of making this video, it's running Android 8.1. This is a 64-bit operating system right out of the box. They do have plans to go to Android 9.0. USB Type-C with Qualcomm Quick Charge, 3.5mm audio jack, a 16-megapixel Sony sensor rear camera, and a 5-megapixel front. This also supports 802.11bgn and AC Wi-Fi, so we can pick up that 5 GHz network, and built-in Bluetooth 5.0. With a price tag of $350 to $400, I think it's reasonable for what's out there on the market right now. As for the built-in physical controller, we have our left shoulder button, right shoulder button, left analog stick, right analog stick, D-pad. We also have start and select. Now these aren't physical buttons, they are touch buttons on the screen, but it shouldn't matter much for start and select. And finally, we have our 4 face buttons, X, Y, B, and A. They're labeled as mountain, water, moon, and sun, which is a little different take on the layout, but I personally kind of like this idea. Alright, so as you can see, this thing is pretty massive. I did want to compare it to some other handheld devices that I have laying around, like the PS Vita and the PSP, because obviously this looks just like a PS Vita, but it's much larger as you can see. and the PSP is just tiny nowadays. A lot of people are also going to probably make the comparison between the i7s and the GPD XD or the XD Plus. So I have the XD here, which is basically the same form factor as the XD Plus. It's got that clamshell design, so you will protect the screen, and unfortunately this i7s will be prone to scratches unless you get like a glass screen protector or something like that. But overall, it is much bigger than the XD or the GPD Win 2. Which is one of my favorite handheld devices, but it comes in at around $700 to $800. So now I think it's time to get into some benchmarks. I did run Geekbench, 3D Mark, and Antutu. I just wanted to see what this thing could do before we get into some gameplay and emulation. So here's Geekbench 4 Pro. On the single core score, we got an 1839, multi-core 5777. Now this is higher than the NVIDIA Shield Android TV, but much lower than a Snapdragon 845 or 835 device. After all, the i7s isn't running a flagship CPU. This is a Snapdragon 710. Next up, I have Antutu, and the score here was pretty decent for a mid-range CPU. We scored a 168,000. Now on the CPU, UX, and memory, we were much higher than the NVIDIA Shield, but on the GPU, it just kind of destroyed this thing, and it does that with most devices. So on raw CPU performance, the i7s does outperform the NVIDIA Shield Android TV. But when it comes to GPU-intensive tasks or benchmarks, the Shield's always going to win. The last benchmark I ran was 3D Mark. For Slingshot, we scored a 2,736. For Slingshot Extreme on OpenGL 3.1, 1874. Vulkan, 1719. So overall, it actually did a decent job in all these benchmarks, but like I always say, benchmarks are benchmarks, and we need to get into some real-world performance. So we're going to get into some native Android gameplay and some emulation right now. First up, we have Fortnite. Now, I personally don't play this game, so I'm not going to get into any battles, but it seems to perform pretty well. I didn't have to do any hacking to get this up and running. I just downloaded the installer from Epic's website, and it works right out of the box. Recently, Epic added support for game controllers on iOS and Android, but unfortunately, since we only have L1 and R1, you're still going to need the touchscreen for some of the actions. Here's PUBG Mobile, and it runs fine on this device. Luckily, MOQI has their own key mapper built in, so you can go ahead and download different key maps for this game so we can get the controller working, or you can customize it to your liking. Here's an oldie but a goodie. This is Rockstar's Bully. You can download this on the Google Play Store. Didn't have to do any kind of key mapping at all. The controls just work right out of the box. Overall, this device is going to be able to play any native Android game, be it a controller-based game or a touchscreen-based game. I got one more native Android game to test here. This is Asphalt 9 Legends. Performance is outstanding. So far, I've been really impressed with the emulation performance on this device. It definitely outperforms the GPD XD or the XD Plus. This is a Dreamcast emulator called Redream. You can download it from the Google Play Store. Got 2 games to test here. FPS is up in the top left-hand corner. We're getting constant 60. Here's Drastic, the Nintendo DS emulator. You're not going to have any trouble playing any DS game on here. As long as it works with this emulator, it's going to run at full speed, even with high-resolution 3D rendering on. I had to throw a couple PSP games in here. I'm using PPSSPP from the Google Play Store. This is Tekken Dark Resurrection. I'm at 3x resolution and we're getting full speed emulation here. So let's move over to a harder to emulate game. God of War Chains of Olympus, 3x resolution. I do notice a couple dips here and there to around 58, but overall I'm really impressed with this. If you drop it down to 2x, you'll get a constant 60 throughout. N64 is going to be no trouble at all with this device. Even Conker's Bad Fur Day is going to run at full speed. This is GoldenEye 007, and I'm using the MUQI 64 Plus FZ core from the Google Play Store. Finally, at least for this video, here's the Dolphin emulator running. I'm using the Vulkan backend. This is Soul Calibur 2, and we're at 60 FPS. Yes, every once in a while I do notice a dip down to around 55, but overall this is very impressive to see Gamecube running on a device like this. The Dolphin emulator on Android's come a very long way, and it's getting better every week. They have new development builds all the time, so if you're using an older version, check out a newer development build and it may work better on your device. Now, I'm not going to come out and say that every single Gamecube game is going to run fine on this device, because I know it won't, but there are a lot of games that are going to run at full speed. Like Mario Kart, as you just saw, Soul Calibur, Time Splitters, Mario Sunshine, and a lot of other ones. Now, I don't have the time to test every single game on this device for Gamecube, but I am willing to make a dedicated video just showing off about 10 or 12 games running. So if there's something you want to see running on this device with the Dolphin emulator, let me know in the comments below. So my initial impressions of the MOQI i7s, I absolutely love this thing. It's much better than I ever thought it would be. If you're into native Android gaming, this definitely has you covered. You can do Fortnite and PUBG just like you saw, and those are two of the more intensive games that you're going to run on an Android device. And personally for me, the reason I love this so much is the emulation performance. Now, I didn't show off any older stuff like NES, 2600, PC Engine, SNES, all of that's going to run fine on here. But I did show off some higher end emulators that struggle on lower end devices, and it definitely does an amazing job. Full speed Dreamcast emulation using Redream, and you can also up the resolution in there. Same thing with PSP using PPSSPP, and as you saw, it's even got you covered in some Gamecube games. I would definitely recommend this over the GPD XD or the XD Plus. Now, if you got the money, the GPD Win 2 is personally my favorite handheld device I've ever messed around with. It's just an amazing little device, but at $700 to $800, it's really expensive. Another thing to note is, if you already have a Galaxy S8 or up, like a Pixel 3 or something like that, then there's really no need to buy this except for the physical buttons. But you could always add a controller to the phone you have right now. Like I mentioned in the video, my personal phone is an iPhone. This is a tool I use. I refuse to jailbreak it. This is my work phone, so I have no access to really good emulators on my mobile device. So having an option like the MOQI i7s with physical buttons is definitely worth it to me or somebody else in my same situation. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I really appreciate you watching. If you're interested in picking one of these up, I will leave links in the description. I'm also going to leave the full specs down below. Like I said, I will be doing another video on this. If you want to see some more Gamecube games being emulated, let me know what you want to see in the comments below. It'd be really cool if you could hit that like button. If you have any questions, just let me know. But like always, thanks for watching.